Hello, welcome to Yoga Story Time. We will be continuing Lecture 1 of An Introduction to Yoga by Annie Besant. This was written again in the early 1900s, 1907, published. Let me grab some water quick. The water was so far away from me. So we're going to be continuing reading this first lecture. There's quite a bit in the first lecture, so we're going to read for an hour and see how far we get here. I will be adding a little bit of commentary here and there throughout as I read, and we're all reading this together for the first time. So with that, apologies for any errors in as I read. There will be probably some, so apologies on that. I did want to share a little bit. If you didn't see the first one, do check that out. I believe I put that in the description, and if I haven't, I will make sure that I do that after this live. I'll add that that very first yoga story time in the description if it isn't already in there. But I would recommend checking out that first one if you want to read this in order with me. So I would check that out first. We last ended with Lecture 1, Man, a Duality. And I wanted to touch on a little bit of what she had been saying here. She was talking about mind and body, so that's the duality, and that yoga is mind and body, bringing those two things together. Another thing that she had mentioned about yoga, and again, these are lectures where she's attempting to make yoga more accessible to, I suppose, the Western mind, and compared it to gardening. But the way that she was comparing it to gardening, and some other things as well, but the way that she was comparing it to gardening is the gardener, if they want to grow certain things, they have to sort of, this wasn't the word used, but essentially what she was saying is that they have to sort of manipulate the land in order to grow what they want to grow. And in a similar way, we apply certain aspects of yoga in order to facilitate our own growth and development toward a unified mind-body. I did want to touch a little bit on, give a little bit of commentary on that, because of course we know now, because this reading is from, these lectures are from 1907, perhaps before we knew a little bit more about the importance of native plants and the importance of diversity of plants. When gardening now, there is a movement, and has been here and there, a movement to work with what plants grow best in that particular place, in that particular environment. And so similarly, I think part of yoga, at least how I have come to understand practicing yoga, is not necessarily about applying certain aspects of the yoga practice to manipulate our mind and body, though there might be some of that, but it's also about, or more so, I think, about accepting where we're at in the moment and working with that. So similarly, I would say that we're not necessarily trying to manipulate or force change or force fast change, but we're working with where we're at in the moment. So for example, taking the asana practice, the physical practice of yoga, we're not going right into handstand if we're just starting the physical practice of yoga. Rather, we build up to it based on where we're at and based on what's going on in our shoulders, in our abdominal muscles, what's going on in our body. We may never hit handstand. We may never be able to move into handstand depending on how everything is moving in our body or not moving in our body. So I want to just to kind of bring that point to mind from what she was talking about this sort of using yoga for faster growth. To me, it's not about growing quickly, but it's about accepting where we're at and actually slowing down so that we can mindfully observe where we're at. So with that in mind, we will continue on. Again, I am reading this for the first time, as you might be listening to it for the first time, and we are reading an introduction to Yoga, a series of 4 lectures by Annie Besant from 1907. We're on lecture 1, and we're continuing on to the section called States of Mind. I realize I think I still have the music going, so apologies. Okay, there. Now, states of mind. Let us take it in detail. 4 states of consciousness are spoken of amongst us. Waking consciousness, or Jagrat, the dream consciousness, or Svapna, the deep sleep consciousness, or Sushupti, and the state beyond that called Turiya. How are those related to the body? It is impossible to avoid the use of these technical terms even in an introduction to yoga. There are no exact English equivalents, and they are no more troublesome to learn than any other technical psychological terms. So this is in reference to the word Turiya, which is a word that she gives no direct translation for. Jagrat is the ordinary waking consciousness that you and I are using at the present time. If our consciousness works in the subtle or astral body, astral body and is able to impress its experiences upon the brain, it is called Svapna, or in English, dream consciousness. It is more vivid and real than the Jagrat state. When working in the subtler form, the mental body, it is not able to impress its experiences on the brain. It is called Sushupti, or deep sleep consciousness. Then the mind is working on its own contents, not on outer objects. But if it has so far separated itself from connection with the brain that it cannot be readily recalled by outer means, then it is called Turiya, a lofty state of trance. These 4 states, when correlated to the 4 planes, represent a much unfolded consciousness. Jagrat is related to the physical, Svapna to the astral, Sushupti to the mental, and Turiya to the Buddhic. When passing from one world to another, we should use these words to designate the consciousness working under the conditions of each world. but the same words are repeated in the books of yoga with a different context. There the difficulty occurs if we have not learned their relative nature. Svapna is not the same for all, nor is Shushupti the same for everyone. Above all, the word samadhi, to be explained in a moment, is used in different ways and in different senses. How then are we to find our way in this apparent tangle? By knowing the state which is the starting point, and then the sequence will always be the same. All of you are familiar with the waking consciousness in the physical body. You can find 4 states even in that if you analyze it, and a similar sequence of the states of the mind is found on every plane. How to distinguish them then? Let us take the waking consciousness and try to see the 4 states in that. Suppose I take up a book and read it. I read the words. My eyes arc related to the outer physical consciousness. That is the Jagrat state. I go behind the words to the meaning of the words. I have passed from the waking state of the physical plane into the svapna state of waking consciousness that sees through the outer form, seeking the inner life. So I'll pause here just to give comment or clarification, partly for me, so for my own understanding as well. So I believe what she's saying here is that these 4 states of being can exist across many areas. So for example, when she brings in this example of reading, there is the physical act of reading, but then there's now I'm thinking of the words and what do the words mean is the svapna state. I have passed, going behind the words. I pass from this to the mind of the writer. Here the mind touches the mind. It is the waking consciousness in its sushupti state. If I pass from this contact and enter the very mind of the writer and live in that man's mind, then I have reached the turiya state of the waking consciousness. Yeah, this is a pretty fun analogy here. So taking that example of reading, there is that physical act of reading. So we're moving our eyes across the page, across the words. Then the svapna state would be that going a little bit deeper into what do the words mean? What are we actually reading? And then, what is the writer thinking of when they're saying this? That's the Shushupti state. And then the Turiya state is embodying the writer, him or herself, or themselves. Take another illustration. I look at any watch. I am in Jagrat. I close my eyes and make an image of the watch. I am in Svapna. I call together many ideas of many watches and reach the ideal watch. I am in Sushupti. I pass to the ideal of time in the abstract. I am in Turiya. But all these are stages in the physical plane consciousness. I have not left the body. In this way, you can make states of mind intelligible and real instead of mere words. Samadhi. Some other important words which recur from time to time in the Yoga Sutras need to be understood, though there are no exact English equivalents, as they must be used to avoid clumsy circumlocutions, it is necessary to explain them. It is said, yoga is samadhi. Samadhi is a state in which the consciousness is so disassociated from the body that the latter remains insensible. It is a state of trance in which the mind is fully self-conscious, though the body is insensitive, and from which the mind returns to the body with the experiences it has had in the superphysical state, remembering them when again immersed in the physical brain. Samadhi for any one person is relative to his waking consciousness, but implies insensitiveness of the body. If an ordinary person throws himself into trance and is active on the astral plane, his samadhi is on the astral. If his consciousness is functioning in the mental plane, samadhi is there. The man who can so withdraw from the body as to leave it insensitive while his mind is fully self-conscious can practice samadhi. So one comment I'll make here, because there have been some studies that suggest, for example, with meditation, which is why when I guide the meditation, the daily meditation for misfits, I have one of the disclaimers, which invites people to call the 988 number or visit the website, where this is a number that you can visit to get more mental health support. So there have been studies that have shown that when people do disassociate, that particularly if there's already some destabilized mental health issues going on, this type of disassociation in meditation can cause psychosis. So we want to, and usually that's in, I believe the studies were on more like long-term guided meditation. So not necessarily the shorter 15 to 30 minute meditations that I guide. However, it's still so important for us to be very aware of where we're at mentally, emotionally, because meditation is not meant to be an escape from ourselves, from our physical. It's not even really meant, at least as I see it, it's not meant to be disassociative. It's meant to bring us deeper into who we are so that when we come back into kind of that more physical space, we can move a little bit more authentically, genuinely, and with a sense of harmony of body, mind, emotional space. So I just want to bring that up as she had mentioned here, this kind of disassociative nature of samadhi. The phrase yoga is samadhi covers facts of the highest significance and greatest instruction. Suppose you are only able to reach the astral world when you are asleep. Your consciousness there is, as we have seen, in the svapna state. But as you slowly unfold your powers, the astral forms begin to intrude upon your waking physical consciousness until they appear as distinctly as do physical forms, and thus become objects of your waking consciousness. The astral world then, for you, no longer belongs to the svapna consciousness, but to the Jagrat. You have taken two worlds within the scope of your Jagrat consciousness, the physical and the astral worlds, the mental world is in your svapna consciousness. Your body is then the physical and the astral bodies taken together. As you go on, the mental plane begins similarly to intrude itself, and the physical, astral, and mental all come within your waking consciousness. All these are, then, your Jagrat world. These three worlds form but one world to you. They're three corresponding bodies, but one body that perceives and acts. The three bodies of the ordinary man have become one body for the yogi. If under these conditions you want to see only one world at a time, you must fix your attention on it, and thus focus it. You can, in that state of enlarged waking, concentrate your attention to the physical and see it. Then the astral and mental will appear hazy. So you can focus your attention on the astral and see it. Then the physical and the mental being out of focus will appear dim. You will easily understand this if you remember that in this hall, I may focus my sight in the middle of the hall, when the pillars on both sides will appear indistinctly. Or I may concentrate my attention on a pillar and see it distinctly, but then I see you only vaguely at the same time. It is a change of focus, not a change of body. Remember that all which you can put aside as not yourself is the body of the yogi, and hence, as you go higher, the lower bodies form but a single body, and the consciousness in that sheath of matter, which it still cannot throw away, that becomes the man. So let me take a moment to collect my thoughts here. So this is really interesting because we have this idea, which has been now debunked time and time again, though people still use it. This idea of multitasking, right? This is not something that we can actually do, but we still have this term that we use, and we know now that we can actually only focus on one thing well at a time. So there is no multitasking. And so I think this is where what she is suggesting here, that when we focus, even in sight, as she was explaining here, because again, these are lectures, so she's speaking to, I imagine, a group of students in a hall. So when we physically focus our attention on one item in our room, right? Everything else sort of in the periphery is a little bit blurred, maybe skewed perception in some way. And this is similar mentally when we close our eyes and maybe direct our focus. And this is one of the things, and one of the ways that I have shifted how I speak about meditation, is that it's not this idea that we're dismissing thoughts or that we're letting go of thoughts. Because without thinking, we are not living. So the thoughts are always there. But what we can do, and what's easier for us to do biologically, is instead of letting go of a thought that is unpleasant to us, redirecting our focus toward a different thought. So when I sometimes guide a mindfulness that includes some imagery, or when I sometimes guide imagery, I'm not asking people to let go of anything unpleasant, but rather redirect. Are you experiencing busyness of mind, for example? And then I might say, redirect your focus toward some image that brings you a sense of calm or peace. It is much easier for us to redirect our focus than to let go. And when we redirect our focus, what maybe was the unpleasant thought can just naturally fade into the background. So this is kind of where she is going here with this this idea of focus and directing focus toward a certain area. We're dimming anything else that is not given to that focus. Yoga is samadhi. It is the power to withdraw from all that you know as body and to concentrate yourself within. That is samadhi. No ordinary means will then call you back to the world that you have left. This will also explain to you the phrase in the secret doctrine that the adept begins his samadhi in the atmic plane. When a jivan mukta enters into samadhi, he begins it on the atmic plane. All planes below the atmic are one plane for him. He begins his samadhi on a plane to which the mere man cannot rise. He begins it on the atmic plane, and thence rises stage by stage to the higher cosmic planes. The same word, samadhi, is used to describe the states of the consciousness, whether it rises above the physical into the astral, as in self-induced trance, or as in self-induced trance of an ordinary man, or as in the case of Jivan Mukta, when the consciousness being already centered in the fifth, or atmic plane, it rises to the higher planes of a larger world. So going back here to this, because there's a note here. Let me go back to, no ordinary means will then call you back to the world that you have left. And the note here says, an Indian yogi in samadhi, discovered in the forest by some ignorant and brutal Englishman, was so violently ill used that he returned to his tortured body only to leave it again at once by death. So there is probably well, we won't get too deep here into, but I wonder if there will be some notes that kind of address this idea of colonialism and colonization. All right, but we will continue on here. The literature of yoga. So I have this, apologies, I think like a cat hair that's just kind of like floating around my nose. Okay, let's move on. The literature of yoga. Unfortunately for non-Sanskrit knowing people, the literature of yoga is not largely available in English. The general teachings of yoga are to be found in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. So, of course, again, this having been published in 1907, there is much more literature out there, not necessarily of course, not in the public domain and in the public domain, but there is much more out there on yoga. So, for example, the word samadhi has been often translated to enlightenment. Those in many translations, so the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, those in many translations are within your reach, but they are general, not special. They give you the main principles, but do not tell you about the methods in any detailed way. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, while you are told to make sacrifices, to become indifferent, and so on, it is all of the nature of moral precept, absolutely necessary indeed, but still not telling you how to reach the conditions put before you. The special literature of yoga is, first of all, many of the minor Upanishads, the 108, as they are called. Few of these are translated. And then I'll read this note. Dr. Otto Schroeder, director of the Adyar Library, is now engaged on these and is busy with the laborious task of constructing a critical text to be followed by a complete translation copiously annotated. A great boon will have been bestowed on all interested in Sanskrit literature when this work is completed. I imagine that work is completed, but maybe keep a notebook close by. I have Post-it notes over here. So I have a notebook here. I'm going to make little notes to myself of what I want to address in the intro of the next reading session. So I'm going to look up and see if that is out there. Dr. Otto Schroeder. And he has this translation of Sanskrit. All right. Thank you for your patience as I take some notes here. Then comes the enormous mass of literature called the Tantras. These books have an evil significance in the ordinary English ear, but not quite rightly. The Tantras are very useful books, very valuable and instructive. All occult science is to be found in them, but they are divisible into three classes: those that deal with white magic, those that deal with black magic, and those that deal with what we may call gray magic, a mixture of the two. Now, magic is the word which covers the methods of deliberately bringing about supernormal physical states by the action of the will. So again, I have not read this before, so this is all quite new to me as well. And I don't know a lot about specifically about tantric yoga. A high tension of the nerves brought on by anxiety or disease leads to ordinary hysteria, emotional and foolish. A similarly high tension brought about by the will renders a man sensitive to superphysical vibrations. Going to sleep has no significance, but going into samadhi is a priceless power. The process is largely the same, but one is due to ordinary conditions, the other to the action of the trained will. The yogi is the man who has learned the power of the will and knows how to use it to bring about foreseen and foredetermined results. This knowledge has ever been called magic. It is the name of the great science of the past, the one science, to which only the word great was given in the past. The Tantras contain the whole of that. The occult side of man and nature, the means whereby discoveries may be made, the principles whereby the man may recreate himself, all these are in the Tantras. The difficulty is that without a teacher, they are very dangerous. And again, a man trying to practice the tantric methods without a teacher makes himself very ill. So the Tantras have got a bad name both in the West and here in India. A good many of the American occult books now sold are scraps of the Tantras which have been translated. One difficulty is that these tantric works often use the name of a bodily organ to represent an astral or mental center. There is some reason in that because all the centers are connected with each other from body to body. But no reliable teacher would set his pupil to work on the bodily organs unless he had some control over the higher centers and had carefully purified the physical body. Knowing the one helps you to know the other, and the teacher who has been through it all can place his pupil on the right path. But I think there's just a minor spelling or a minor grammatical thing here, because this says, but you take up these words, and I think should be if. But if you take up these words, which are all physical, and do not know what the physical word is applied, then you will only become very confused and may injure yourself. For instance, in one of the sutras, it is said that if you meditate on a certain part of the tongue, you will obtain astral sight. That means that if you meditate on the pituitary body just over this part of the tongue, astral sight will be opened. The particular word used to refer to a center has a correspondence in the physical body, and the word is often applied to the physical organs when the other is meant. This is what is called a blind, and it is intended to keep the people away from dangerous practices in the books that are published. People may meditate on that part of their tongue all their lives without anything coming of it. But if they think upon the corresponding center in the body a good deal, much harm may come of it. Meditate on the navel, it is also said. This means the solar plexus, for there is a close connection between the two. But to meditate on that is to incur the danger of a serious nervous disorder, almost impossible to cure. I'm obviously not making that claim, I'm just reading. So take this as you will. All who know how many people in India suffer through these practices, ill understood, recognize that it is not wise to plunge into them without someone to tell you what they mean, and what may be safely practiced and what not. What may be safely practiced and what not. The other part of the yoga literature is a small book called the Sutras of Patanjali. That is available, but I am afraid few are able to make much of it by themselves. In the first place, to elucidate the sutras, which are simply headings, there is a great deal of commentary in Sanskrit, only partially translated, and even the commentaries have this peculiarity, that all the most difficult words are merely repeated, not explained, so that the student is not much enlightened. And I will be starting the Yoga Sutras on December 21st. I believe I have that scheduled for. So we will be reading through a translation of that. I remember the first name of the person who's translating, but again, it's also in the Gutenberg.org on the Gutenberg.org website, where I'll be reading from different texts. So one thing I appreciate about what she is suggesting here in general is that certainly, and I obviously offer meditation and yoga practices to whomever is, whomever finds me online. So you have a teacher guiding you. But there are certain practices out there, particularly breathing techniques, and I guide some pretty simple, for the most part, breathing techniques, where it is important that if you don't really know what you're doing, and this is true of just about anything that we're just starting, it can just be helpful to have a teacher guiding you, to have somebody that is guiding you to through the practice safely. Whether that is a meditation practice, whether that is a yogic practice, or a asana practice, physical practice, whether that's a tantra practice. And again, because I personally do not know much and have not studied tantra, I don't guide it. So I guide and stick to what I have studied and what I know, which is the physical and meditation practices. But yeah, I think it is important for us to have teachers that are guiding us, so that we don't injure our bodies. One of the things that has been talked about to some degree in the yoga community is this idea of having some kind of state, like some kind of regulations around guiding practices. It hasn't really been talked about a lot, but I've seen that pop up here and there. Should we have some kind of regulations around, just like in the same way that we have regulations and licenses for massage, there are certifications for for physical training, physical fitness training, that kind of thing. But for such things as yoga, there are certain schools that are certified through a larger body called Yoga Alliance. That's an international yoga body that provides at least a little bit of guidance as to what a yoga curriculum should include for a yoga school. So knowing that a teacher or a school is Yoga Alliance certified and aligned can help prevent some of those injuries. But again, it's not a heavily regulated practice because it is such a broad practice. A yoga teacher training doesn't even necessarily, well, there has to be, I think through Yoga Alliance, there does have to be something of a physical aspect. But because yoga is so broad, it can include just guiding mantras. It could just be guiding meditation. It could just be guiding the physical practice. It could just be guiding, there's so many different schools of yoga. There's there's so many different sects of the yoga practice that it can be difficult to kind of regulate it. But I do lean a little bit toward, even though it would require more work on my part, toward maybe having some kind of regulation around guiding movement, because unfortunately there are some schools and some teachers that are not aligned with Yoga Alliance, and even some that are, that may not be fully aware of the way that the body can and should move. So, for example, for myself, I have significantly slowed down both my own practice and the way that I teach, because I do teach a lot of more like middle-aged to older, mostly women. And so those bodies require different types of movement than perhaps, a younger, more agile body. So all of that is to say, it's good to have a teacher. All right, let's move on. I think this will be the last section that we read, maybe a couple more sections here, and then we'll close. Some definitions. There are a few words constantly recurring which need brief definitions in order to avoid confusion. They are unfolding, evolution, spirituality, psychism, yoga, and mysticism. Unfolding always refers to consciousness. Evolution to forms. Evolution is the homogeneous becoming of heterogeneous genius. The simple becoming complex. But there is no growth and no perfectioning for spirit, for consciousness. It is all there and always, and all that can happen to it is to turn itself outwards instead of remaining turned inwards. The God in you cannot evolve, but he may show forth his powers through matter that he has appropriated for the purpose, and the matter evolves to serve him. He himself only manifests what he is, and on that, many a saying of the great mystics may come to your mind. Become, says St. Ambrose, what you are. A paradoxical phrase, but one that sums up a great truth. Become in outer manifestation that which you are in inner reality. That is the object of the whole process of yoga. Spirituality is the realization of the one. Psychism is the manifestation of intelligence through any material vehicle. And some notes here, or one note here. Intelligence through any material vehicle. And the note is, see London Lectures of 1907, Spirituality and Psychism. So, yoga is the seeking of union by the intellect, a science. Mysticism is the seeking of the same union by emotion. And there's a note here. The word yoga may, of course, be rightly used of all union with the self, whatever the road taken. I am using it here in the narrower sense, as peculiarly connected with the intelligence as a science, herein following Patanjali. See the mystic. He fixes his mind on the object of devotion. He loses self-consciousness and passes into the rapture of love and adoration, leaving all external ideas, wrapped in the object of his love, and a great surge of emotion sweeps him up to God. He does not know how he has reached that lofty state. He is conscious only of God and his love for him. Here is the rapture of the mystic, the triumph of the saint. The yogi does not work like that. Step after step, he realizes what he is doing. He works by science and not by emotion, so that any who do not care for science, finding it dull and dry, are not at present unfolding that part of their nature which will find its best help in the practice of yoga. The yogi may use devotion as a means. This comes out very plainly in Patanjali. He has given many means whereby yoga may be followed, and curiously, devotion to Ishvara is one of several means. There comes out of the spirit of the scientific thinker. Devotion to Ishvara is not for him an end in itself, but means to an end, the concentration of the mind. You see, there is at once the difference of spirit. Devotion to Ishvara is the path of the mystic. He attains communion by that. Devotion to Ishvara as a means of concentrating the mind is the scientific way in which the yogi regards devotion. No number of words would have brought out the difference of spirit between yoga and mysticism as well as this. The one looks upon devotion to Ishvara as a way of reaching the beloved, and the other looks upon it as a means of reaching concentration. To the mystic, God in himself is the object of search. Delight in him is the reason for approaching him. Union with him in consciousness is his goal. But to the yogi, fixing the attention on God is merely an effective way of concentrating the mind. In the one, devotion is used to obtain an end. In the other, God is seen as the end and is reached directly by rapture. So this is, I think, part of the reason why yoga does not have to be tied to religion, though it can use religion to for mind-body union and harmony. So regardless of religious belief or no religious belief, yoga is, and this is why people speak about yoga as a science, yoga is this sort of series of different things that you can do as a yoga practitioner. Again, the two that I'm most familiar with are meditation and the asana practice, our physical practice. These are rituals that we can use in order to further understand who we are and move more genuinely as that being, as that having an understanding of who we are and moving in who we are, versus this sort of idea of, and they're using the term mysticism, where in religion, God is the main focus, right? Or whatever entity or entities one believes, depending on what the religion is the main focus, and everything, it kind of revolves around that entity, whereas yoga, the entity can be useful in order to further develop an ability to focus our attention, if that makes sense. And do feel free to, as we're reading through this, I know the community, we're still building this community here, but do feel free to share in the comments, whether you're catching this live or on the replay. Share in the comments your thoughts. I will read, okay, yeah, we have about 4 minutes, and this is this next section is very short. It's a little bit more about God, so whatever your beliefs or whatever you believe or don't believe, as always, what I suggest is taking what's helpful, leaving what's not, and commenting your 2 cents, sharing what your thoughts are on these lectures, and as I continue to read other texts, as I continue to read other texts, feel free to share your thoughts. All right, God without and God within. That leads us to the next point, the relation of God without to God within. To the yogi, who is the very type of Hindu thought, there is no definite proof of God save the witness of the self within to his existence. And his idea of finding the proof of God is that you should strip away from your consciousness all limitations and thus reach the stage where you have pure consciousness, save a veil of the thin nirvanic matter. Then you know that God is. So you read in the Upanishad, whose only proof is the witness of the self. This is very different from Western methods of thought, which try to demonstrate God by a process of argument. The Hindu will tell you that you cannot demonstrate God by any argument or reasoning. He is above and beyond reasoning, and although the reason may guide you on the way, it will not prove to demonstrate that God is. The only way you can know him is by diving into yourself. There you will find him, and know that he is without as well as within you. And yoga is a system that enables you to get rid of everything from consciousness that is not God, save the one veil of the nirvanic atom. And so to know that God is with an unshakable certainty of conviction. To the Hindu, that inner conviction is the only thing worthy to be called faith. And this gives you the reason why faith is said to be beyond reason, and so is often confused with credulity. Faith is beyond reason because it is the testimony of the self to himself, that conviction of existence of self as self, of which reason is only one of the outer manifestations, and the only true faith is that inner conviction, which no argument can either strengthen or weaken, of the innermost self of you, that of which alone you are entirely sure. It is the aim of yoga to enable you to reach that self certainly, not by a sudden glimpse of intuition, but steadily, unshakably, and unchangeably. And then that self is reached. Then the question, is there a God? Can never again come into the human mind. So this is something that I particularly appreciate as someone who once once believed in and practiced Christianity, and then had many questions. And not to get too deep in the weeds here, because we are at that hour, so I do want to close and move on to other things in my day. But I think that this is important to note, that in yoga, the idea of God is not this idea, and this kind of goes back a little bit to those first lectures where she talks about really yoga does not force itself on people. It's not a preachy thing. It's something that is entirely within and about bringing out what is deep within. And so I think in a similar way, when we think about, if we think about God in the practice of yoga, again, it's not about trying to argue that God exists to other people, but rather it is a deeply internal practice of observing self and going into that deep place of self to see what is there, what we experience as perhaps God, or what some might call universe. We might experience something in nature that feels meaningful beyond our humanness. And so I think that's important to note. And again, as someone myself who used to have some of the similar arguments that I see still going on today in Christianity, still I hear people talking about, well, how can you be moral? It's just sometimes wild to me. How can you be moral without a God? How can you be moral outside of a faith, outside of a religion? And particularly, it's often Christians that I hear this from, is how can you be moral without Christianity? And as it turns out, plenty of people are moral outside of religious belief because of a set of values. Having a set of values is, I believe, enough. Having values that say, okay, I'm going to practice kindness. I'm going to practice being welcoming. I'm going to practice being good to my neighbor. I'm going to practice unselfishness or generosity, rather, the more positive way. It's about what our values are. My values have shifted over the years, and so my kind of big three values are intentionality, focus, and meaning. So I want to, in the things that I do, want to make sure that my actions are aligned with something, with intentionality, with focus, and with something meaningful. And so I think that is the big difference too between the kind of dogmatically religious person that believes that everyone needs to believe the same as them, and in this case, the yogi, the person that says it doesn't matter what anyone else believes. No one has to believe what I believe because my conviction is so strong based on my experience of whatever, of my own spiritual space. My conviction is so strong that I believe it. I don't need anyone else to believe it. I can simply live it. And I think that is is important. And I know that there are certain people in various religions who also act that way, who also say, well, I don't need to preach. I don't need to have others believe. I can just believe it and live it. And I think that's the important, thing to take away when we think about spirituality and in the context of yoga practice. This is what we do. This is who we are. This is our practice. This is these different rituals that we might do are deeply personal and deeply individual. And while we can do these things in community, as we do in community, and that can be even more of a powerful practice too, to meditate in community, to move in community, to listen and speak in community. There's not necessarily a call from the teacher for the student to be anything other than who they are, or to do anything other than what they do. Okay, I think I've said enough. I think we've been on long enough. So we will continue through this first lecture. There's quite a bit in this first lecture. So we'll continue on with this first lecture. Probably, maybe I'll jump on tomorrow. We'll see. But keep an eye out there. If you're following this on YouTube, this is in the Yoga Storytime playlist. So you'll see the updates of upcoming readings in that playlist. So I might pop on tomorrow. Otherwise, it'll probably be next week, as I'll be out of town this weekend, and just focusing on those daily practices then. Do feel free to join me for Pause Practice Play. I have 2 upcoming Pause Practice Play sessions today at 3 and then again at 5:15. That is Central Standard Time. That 5:15 p.m. is exclusively on Twitch and YouTube, as I do have a goal on Twitch and YouTube, a goal for December for Twitch, 25 followers. So please like, share, follow, and on YouTube, 150 subscribers. These are my December goals, so you can help me reach those again by liking, sharing, following, subscribing. With that, again, do feel free to share in the comments your 2 cents, anything, any input that you have, any clarity that you have gained from these last few sections in this first lecture. And next time, whether tomorrow or next week, we will move on to the section called Inward and Outward Turned Consciousness. And again, I am reading these from the Gutenberg.org website, that you can find all kinds of public domain works for free. You can read them for free. Obviously I can perform them for free or read them out loud to you all for free, with the little blurb in there in the description that talks about Gutenberg.org. And they do take donations as well. So you can donate directly to Gutenberg.org to help them with their mission of uploading public domain works and researching out what is in the public domain. So with that, thank you so much for being here. As always, thank you for being you. Take care of yourselves out there.